How much money should you have saved at your age? Keeping up with the Joneses isn't just about conspicuous consumption. Having a benchmark for personal finance is as important as a benchmark for investing. Figuring out whether you've saved enough money for retirement is complicated, so we're here to help you with that. Now, today's informative video may not give you peace of mind, but it's certainly going to help you become a better investor. Let's start with a great quote. Always compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Now, the man who said that, Jordan Peterson, has become sort of a political figurehead, but if you watch some of his old recorded lectures in uni, they're excellent. And I always like to think about wealth as a three-legged stool. So there's three variables here. The first two you can control: the amount of money you earn or could be earning to a certain extent, the amount of money you invest, and FIRE people are always tweaking this parameter, and the return on your investment. So let's start with point one. Now, if we look at the top 26 highest paid occupations in the United States, 88% of these are medical professionals, all making over $200,000 a year. So when you think about what you'd like to do when you grow up, then these are certainly avenues to wealth, certainly ones that are going to take a lot of hard work. Now, when considering career, I think there's three cohorts of people. You have first degree folks with a major that's still open to change. So you haven't yet decided what you want to do when you grow up. Then you have first degree major fixed. So these individuals who've already decided what they're going to major in do have some flexibility later on. So they can use an MBA to pivot into something very different, or they can get a master's and move vertically with that, or even a PhD. Now, let's say that all your education is complete. Well, then you should move to benchmarking yourself against an appropriate wage benchmark. Are you making as much as you should? Are you of above average competence? And usually you'll know if that's the case, unless you're unknowingly competent, in which case your boss is going to figure that out real quick and give you increasing amounts of responsibility. Now, both these bullets hold true for any job you hold. You should always make sure that you're maximizing your income. Now, I took a look at my first job. The first half of my career was in software development. I was a software quality assurance analyst and tester in varying capacities, from initially testing to becoming a test lead. And it looks like on average, I should have made $108,000. Now, I didn't, because that was a long time ago, but this is a great place to start looking to see, are you making what you should for whatever role that you happen to be in? So takeaways here: the amount of money you earn, that first leg of the three-legged stool, should be benchmarked against public wage averages, and make sure this is optimally configured as much as possible. So if you're moderately competent, you should be in the median, and if you're highly competent, push for your boss to give you a raise. Now, this directly influences our next leg of the stool: savings. Given my profession, how much should I have saved so far? Now, I asked Perplexity this question. I said, I'm a 35-year-old software quality assurance engineer. How much should I have saved so far? What are the parameters there? Age, right, and salary. So that should give it enough to go on. Indeed, it does, but it gives us quite a large range. It says here I should have saved between $100,000 to $300,000 in retirement savings, and it gives a separate entry there for an emergency fund. What we want here is this. We want a simple rule of thumb for estimating how much money you ought to have saved at any point in your career. And I think this guideline by Fidelity is quite good. It says you should have saved 10 times your income by age 67. You see here at the bottom the key takeaways. It talks about aim to save at least 1 times your salary by 30, and 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50, 8 times by 60, etc. So this rule of thumb seems to be duplicated in other places. I looked as well, but there's a slight problem here if your income varies. And I think what's most important to note here is simply this: you ought to fix your expenditures around the first decent salary you have and pay yourself inflation. So I started working at a very young age, and this is a map of my income over time. And there's a couple things here to note. First, that when I started making a decent amount of money there, you see where that little red dotted line started. That's the standard of living that I adopted, and I only increased that by inflation over time. And then what happens is Of course, you increase your income, and you see the gap there. That incurred debt. That's where I went to B school. And then after B school, of course, that's where you start to see an ROI. And I wanted to point to that arrow that points down there saying 25%. It looks like I had a dip in my income, but the other thing you need to consider here that's very important would be taxation. I went from a 35% tax bracket in the UK to no more than 11% in HK. So I was taking home a lot more of my income in Hong Kong, and then my money proceeded to grow after that. Now, there's other bits of wisdom here. I think, property is fine, but a big house is a pain in the ass. Be a minimalist. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses when it comes to material assets. Drive used Toyotas. There's a lot of things that you can do to adjust that second part of the three-legged stool, which is to invest as much money as possible. And when we look at what they call the 50-30-20 budgeting rule, this says that 50% of your money should go towards your needs, 20% to savings, and 30% to things that you want. I don't know why the 20% and 30% aren't switched here. This is a very, very dangerous way to start thinking about income when you start making a lot of money, because your lifestyle tends to appreciate as the same as those around you. You get a nicer car, you get a nicer house, you start spending more money going to nicer restaurants. So it just depends how long you want to work as a corporate slave. And if you tweak this formula accordingly as your income increases, then you'll do quite well for yourself. And as for the third leg of the stool, the amount of money that you make on the funds you invest in the market, that really comes down to being very smart with your money and not losing money on meme stocks and speculating and being a gambler. A simple 3-portfolio strategy that the Bogleheads practice, that's the simplest, most consistent, predictable path to wealth. So 95% of investors can't do better than that. So you'd do quite good picking a simple strategy. Now, one of the questions raised by our very international audience is around what you ought to have saved if you're from a different country. And of course, different countries have different savings rates, different plans for retirees. And if you think about what countries have the highest savings rates, well, you might think USA or China. Well, that's wrong. Actually, here are the top savers. You have Djibouti there, at the very top, followed by Qatar, Ireland, Gabon, Singapore, Brunei, and Luxembourg. So what does it mean to save? Well, when we talk about top savers, we're really talking about which countries have the highest savings rates. These are not necessarily the nations with the highest income. So the rate at which you're saving money, going back to that point about what you make, you can make a very little amount of money and live quite frugally and save a lot quicker than somebody who makes a lot of money and doesn't save very much of it. So you're probably interested in seeing the actual numbers. So we know what most Americans should have saved based on their salaries. What have they actually saved? So since 2/3 of our viewers live in the United States and we primarily cover U.S. stocks, you see here, this is a metric taken from our YouTube channel. We want to look at how much Americans have saved, and this is rather depressing. So first of all, it appears there's some very wealthy people that skew these averages. So on the right, you see the median, most common metric, and the left, you see the average, simple average. If we look at age 65 through 74, remember what we talked about before? So you ought to have about 10 times your salary in savings. Well, if the average annual salary is around $59,000, and you ought to have $590,000 saved. Instead, people there you see have just $200,000 saved. That implies a $20,000 average salary, which just isn't the case. Takeaway here, the U.S. is a society where people just don't save much, they spend a lot. The bottom line here is that many people are entering their golden years with too little stashed away. So according to an April AARP survey of adults who are saving for retirement, 31% said they aren't sure they'll have enough saved, and 33% said they will not have enough saved. So 60% they're in trouble. And if you do the simple math, then it sure adds up. So retirement age is between 66 and 67. The median retirement savings in the U.S. for this age bracket would be $200,000. So using the 4% rule, and that's a safe annual income of $8,000. The 4% rule says you can withdraw 4% of your money, a fixed amount, 4% of your total money, then you can withdraw that every year and not run out of money. We're going to talk about that later, but it's going to be impossible to live off $8,000 per year, at least in this country. And if you add in Social Security, you get to around $28,000 per year. Now, this means the median American may not be able to comfortably retire at the retirement age without using some geographical arbitrage. So in order to avoid being at the median, you need to start young. If you're below the age of 66, the best time to start investing was yesterday. Second best time is today. If it's too late, well, then you need to start configuring things. We're going to show you a little trick at the end of this video on how you might get away with not having so much money in retirement, and most importantly, not running out. And when we look at other countries, because I'm sure everyone's curious, it appears that they don't have very much money saved up as well. You see the UK here with around $200,000. The Australians there, Europe, and China. It's not just the US. A lot of people don't have enough money saved for retirement. So if we consider the law of averages, and the average annual salary in the US is around $63,800, but we want to take the median, which is often less skewed by outlying numbers, so that's $59,384. So at age 67, 10 times that, you ought to have $590,000 saved up. Now, the 4% rule would give you $23,615 a year, around $2,000 a month. Add to that Social Security of $1,740 per month, and $3,740 a month is a decent retirement, especially if you use geographical arbitrage. But you still might run out of money because you're taking from your savings a fixed cost every year. So here's how to avoid running out of money. We've come up with something that's called the new 4% rule, and I'd love to hear what you think about it. Watch this video next and let us know your thoughts. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this today.